Decorating Pages is a podcast dedicated to taking you behind the scenes of the designs of your favorite TV shows and films. Each episode, I'll be sharing design stories from some of Hollywood's most famous sets. Interviews from set decorators, production designers, directors, and actors about creating the look of TV and film, about their design inspirations, and stories that take sets from page to screen. Hello, and welcome to Decorating Pages. I'm your host, Kim Wanup. Well, it's July, and I'm still not back to work. I'm wondering if any of you are, who are in the industry. I feel like a lot of us started to get our engines running a little bit, and now with this past day of setbacks, I don't know. I really haven't heard anything if film production is essential office work. So I don't know if I'm going back to work anytime soon. I think we're all a little confused. Maybe it's per production basis. I don't know. I seem to be reading that it's okay if you're filming outside, but that just seems like a logistical nightmare also, bringing a whole film crew outside these days. So I don't know. I think I feel the way a lot of people feel is that I can't wait to get back to work, but it's going to be really hard, and I almost just want to sit it out till it's all done, but I love my job, and there's just that fire inside that makes you want to create and get back to it. So hopefully we will. Hopefully, we can all wear a mask and get back to work and wash our hands, and it'll be fine. So I hope so. And this past couple of weeks, I've just been diving into documentaries and films about our industry. So what's one up watching? I did a lot of documentaries in the last week, and my husband and I also restarted watching The Crown on Netflix. I love The Crown. I just think it's magnificent. I just think every aspect of it is just a 10. I think it's a 10. Can't really find a flaw. I mean, maybe I can, but it's the acting. But I think sets and all that jazz is just, I love it. I don't know. I love the whole story of it. I just love it. So we're like halfway through season 1. I love it. What can I say? So I watched this documentary called The Fabulous Alan Carr, which is, I think I watched it on Amazon. I didn't know who Alan Carr was, but I sure should have seen his movies and was pretty much obsessed with Grease 2 when I was young. So he produced Grease 2, La Cage aux Folles, and produced the 1998 Oscars, and just a super duper, he was like an agent and then a producer and just positive guy, and just made you believe things and made you think everything was going to be fabulous, and like loved old Hollywood and old glamour, and the storyline of just how he produced the 1989 Oscars alone is fascinating. It's like, I guess one of the worst produced shows the Oscars ever had. When they showed footage of it, I actually remembered watching it, because I never missed an Oscars when I was younger. So really just, it's a good story, and it talks about Hollywood and producing and getting movies made in a weird way. I watched Making Waves, The Art of Cinematic Sound, which is a documentary that came out last year, 2019, about sound in films. And it just goes into great detail of the emotion that sound brings to films and television. And I think for me, one of the most interesting parts was this. They had this diagram called the Circle of Talent, which is broken up. It looks like a rainbow. And it's broken up into 3 sections, which is voice, sound effects, and music. And so in the voice section, you have production recording, dialogue editing, and ADR. And then in the sound effects department, you have special effects, Foley, and ambience. And then there was just music. So it's crazy to realize how many levels of sound and all these layers that are in just a couple seconds of film. Really wonderfully made documentary. So if you're into sound, or if you're not into sound, it makes you get into sound. Making Waves. I believe that's on Amazon and Netflix. I watched by Sidley Lamont, the great director. Obviously, he did The Wiz, The Verdict, 12 Angry Men, Serpico, Network, Dog Day Afternoon. He did Death Trap, which is one of my guilty pleasures. If you haven't seen Death Trap with Michael Caine and Christopher Reeve and Diane Cannon, it's really bad, but it's really good. It's just wonderful to hear him speak about his films and his color palettes and how he used them, or like he blatantly didn't use color palettes, and then talk about the lighting. Just really interesting filmmaking documentary. And that I watched on Amazon, I believe. Also on Amazon, I watched There Are No Fakes, which is about fake art being passed around for years by the artist Norval Marceau. He's an indigenous artist, really bold, beautiful color, and it's like flowers and animals and his heritage, and he has messages in his art, just beautiful pieces, and I guess they were easily duplicated. I don't know. The documentary follows people who have purchased the art and art dealers who sold it. And then it takes a kind of a weird turn about one of the dudes abusing kids and teens, which I didn't see coming at all, but it really should have been its own documentary. But that was good. And that was on Amazon also. And then I just last night watched Mucho Amor, which on Netflix is so cute. And I'm sorry, I missed the boat on knowing who Walter Mercado was. So I know that I'd seen him in my life, probably on Howard Stern or something, but I had no clue that he was this Puerto Rican icon, and it was simply fascinating. And the best part about this documentary is seeing this dude's house and how he lives, because he's a hoarder of vitamins. And I'm totally stealing that for a character at some point, because it was pretty fascinating to see how he lived. I mean, it's how we all live. You got, some people, we got a lot of shit. Some people have a lot of shit. So, but yeah. So that was really good. That just came out, I believe. I also watched The Lion King, the Al Hirschfeld story, the caricature artist. I wish I could draw like that. What a skill to just draw like he did. And it was for the New Yorker and the New York Times, and fantastic story, really lovely. That was on Amazon also. So yeah, that was my week in documentaries. And The Crown, not bad. On this episode, I speak with Jonathan Fischer, who is an editor in unscripted reality television. He's been working on shows like Expedition Unknown, Little Women Dallas, Battlebots, American Guns, Ultimate Fighter, The Biggest Loser, and a ton more. So he explains to me how the editing process begins, works, and ends in a project. He explains how the tsunami in Japan in 2011 changed the editing industry forever. Who knew? We discuss the ethical responsibility of an editor, especially in reality television. How under current conditions, working remotely is doable but not ideal. And he had a big career change lately into virtual reality and how that relates to editing. He is a dear friend of mine. And I'm a little nervous because editing an editor is weird. I don't really edit much out of these interviews, you could probably tell. So, Maybe the occasional twin screaming, or the gardener, or my neighbor's hot rod revving up in the background. But I try to get that out. I know it's annoying. I'm sorry. But it's always been my intention just to have informative conversation and just to let you listen in. So I hope you enjoy. Such talented friends, I would have to say. But the thing is that you don't really know people's backgrounds. Like, I don't know why you came out here. I don't know why.
That's true, actually.
I really don't know that, but I've been friends with you for so long. And
exactly.
And this backstory is something I don't know of a lot of people. So that's one of the most interesting things of this. Like, even with Ethan, it was like I kind of knew, but not really. Like, I know he went to school and then he came out here, but that dude just fell into it, kind of. Like, and luckily got like big projects and everything. But so how did you want to be an editor? Let me ask that.
I suppose. Okay. How can I even describe this? I think that many people who work within a creative industry, they have something that I think that Patton Oswalt once was calling kind of an ironic moment of basically of just being exposed early on to some sort of like this amazing creative prowess, and then just kind of squandering it, or just kind of like shrugging it off. So How did I get into editing? How did I actually start this? That would be high school, I would say.
Oh, wow.
That would be the most direct way that I would kind of place the beginning of my career path. And that started actually with a wonderful art teacher who's named Vicky Casper. Her name is Vicky Eichler now. She got married and has a wonderful son, and we've stayed very, very close throughout the years. And as an art teacher, of course, she was always trying to get her students to push their boundaries, whether it was a medium of painting or if it was a medium of any kind of mixed media, or if it was a medium of this new thing that we didn't really understand yet, which was us kind of coming to this new crossroads of television and digital media, and for the first time having, albeit in a very crude way, having this accessible to the regular civilians, like where we would not, and by that I mean of course, to regular people. Normally, working with, until quite recently, working with any kind of video equipment was extremely expensive, of course.
Right.
And thanks in large part to globalization, and of course to trade with China, and of course things like JVC and Sony taking these leaps and bounds and Panasonic creating these things called the camcorder, and creating these cultures where instead of using just regular photography, or using that very expensive 16 mil or 8 mil to capture our moments, then for the first time, and the average middle-class family in the 80s could afford a camcorder, and that's what changed everything.
They were so heavy. We had them. They were so heavy.
They were heavy, yeah, and some of them had like cool bells and whistles, and some of them were more compact than others. But you really have to hand it to Sony and JVC for creating these things, because it really was a thankless job of having to miniaturize this more and more every year, and having formats just come and go.
Let me ask you something.
So
did you have a PXL 2000?
No, what did we have? I'll have to look it up and give it to you in the show notes, because it was a Sony, and the actual model number escapes me. But it, as my father always said, that he always wanted to get the ones with the bells and whistles. So it had a lot of really neat features, like it could automatically fade.
I think we went through like 3 or 4 like in my lifetime of the really heavy one, and then it got slimmer, and then you went to that little compact one. But the PXL 2000 was like a toy, kind of. It was marketed for like young filmmakers, like using your action figures to make little movies. So I don't actually know who made that, but I had one. But the tapes that they were like almost cassette tapes, and the tapes that you used to record things were so expensive. Now that your parents had already dished out all this money for this little camcorder.
Yes.
So I only ever had one tape.
I know. So this is the 90s. I'm just turned 42 years old. So this is the 90s, and we were in high school, and Vicky Eichler decided to create sort of a news channel for the school. And, we were thinking every so often that we would run around. This is a Catholic school, and we would run around in uniform. Yeah. And we would just have different reporters making different stories. And usually they were actually pretty much puff pieces. And I think that, once in a while there was a student who passed away. Unfortunately, we made a memorial for her. But in large part, it was very light. We didn't exactly have like some sort of investigative journalism or anything like that in the school. We wouldn't go like we weren't like Katie Couric or something like that trying to crack the story. But
why do the boys get new helmets and the girls don't? Like why?
Exactly. We had to figure out how to edit these stories together, and this was using relatively primitive technology because we didn't really have, at least at that school, we didn't have any way to actually edit our movies together. So we were doing things, something that we call in-camera editing, which, as the name would suggest, it means it's like I'm doing a shot here until someone says these words, cut. I am going to cut to the next shot. You basically are assembling this thing as you go. It's very tedious, and it's never really going to be as smooth as being able to actually edit something. That's something we call frame accurate editing. But the next crude method, let's say the next iteration of this, is something that we would call tape to tape editing, which sometimes you would use like a kind of a control box that would control one deck, and it would play back on one and control the other. And again, very rudimentary effects, some little things you could do. The box worked only half the time, and we would assemble our news stories that way. And this was painstaking. It was not something that was very fun at all. And I do remember that Mrs. Eichler kept us at one point, probably a little later than she should have, for us to just kind of get this thing done in time for broadcast. And little did I know that would actually become kind of the norm sometimes in my career. Again, it's a little bit of an ironic moment. And I was also making plenty of movies with my friends with the aforementioned camcorders, and there were some friends in the neighborhood, and we made countless little films that were just a lot of fun. We kind of learned filmmaking in this very sort of it's like almost this Montessori sort of education of filmmaking, where it's just we were learning with our little peers of teenagers, and we were learning by doing and making all these mistakes as we go. But still, I didn't have any kind of a formal education, but we were actually getting quite good at making dumb little movies. At least I thought we were pretty good at it. But
that's probably the best way to do it, because you're so young. Who cares if you make a mistake? Like, there's no... Yeah. That's probably the best thing about it. Yeah.
That's the time to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then... So then, in the 90s, then I attended college. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology, which I was strategic about because my parents are from there, so I knew that I had countless aunts, uncles, and cousins that I could go and do laundry and get free meals and beer, and then just go back to my dorm. Yeah, it was nice. But I got to learn about professional broadcast quality editing, and of course cameras as well, and everything else you learn in film school during those 4 years. So it was in 1998 was the beginning of my sophomore year. We were learning on these big clunky systems, but little did I know that I was actually learning until I really kind of realized it one day. I mean, I was an adult, but I was just kind of naive. I didn't understand that my tuition was actually paying me to get at least kind of an elementary understanding of how to work with a software and hardware package that was at the time worth probably $70,000 per system. Avid Technology out in Massachusetts at the time, they could charge whatever the hell they wanted, actually.
Right.
So that was kind of one of my paths to editing, and I will say that I know I say it a lot now, but that really was an ironic moment because I hated editing on Avid Media Composer so much, but not for the reasons that you would think. It was actually not to be critical of the school, but it's just because of the logistics of all of this and the limitations of the technology at the time. We didn't have big centralized servers. Storage was extremely, it was not existent. We didn't have centralized storage or a big server or something that anyone would take for granted. And gods, there's so much stuff in the cloud and things like that. No, we would have little zip drives, and a lot of times we would have to still digitize at least part of our movie every time we did it, and we only had I believe it was only a 6-hour block that you could take out for you to edit. So if you can picture how frustrating that is, yes,
well, yeah,
you are digitizing footage every time. Much of the time we didn't have huge hard drives. There was no big we had zip drives that you could keep your project on, and that was about it. So it was a very frustrating thing to have to digitize footage. Sometimes we would keep it in a secret folder and just kind of hide it somewhere. But generally we were supposed to blow our footage away, or we were supposed to just have an understanding that it was volatile. Sure, it might be on there today, but the facilities managers could at any time delete whatever they wanted.
Right.
So that was so it was frustrating. A lot of us started to download versions of Adobe Premiere, which is of course most people familiar with the Adobe Suite know that's still a lot around and kicking. And a lot of us would we were college students, and I really deeply regret this, but we would find illegal means to download this software. And
now it's recorded that you did illegal shit.
I know,
so.
I did illegal shit. Look at me. Yeah. In college, what are MP3s? What's Napsters?
I can't even talk about how much illegal music I downloaded. But
I know. I remember the beginning of my freshman year, people we're downloading these MP3s. I was like, MP what's? And then an hour later, I had more music than I had ever had in my entire life.
Right. I was
18 years old.
In college, I wasn't that savvy. And in college, I was still literally recording Howard Stern on a tape every day and then listening to it at night when I would draft. So I was pretty backwards at that point and had CDs, but MP3s I didn't start downloading until way into probably 2002. I was late to that party. I was still buying CDs.
That's all right. That's not too late. I think it still counts. It's in the early tender years of music piracy.
Could still get a fine. I probably could still get a fine. But then college came and went, and I graduated in 2001, and just like all of my friends, we all one by one moved out. It was I equate it to the kind of the great expansion of the West, kind of like in Far and Away, when they're all those people they're all
just kind of
staking their land.
Staking our land in Los Angeles, and we're all 20 years old. We don't know what we're doing at all, but and a lot of us are starting to kind of get jobs and figure this out. So within a couple of months, so I did not want to be an editor at all when I moved out here.
Oh. Wow.
Not one bit. I was like, I hate this. But then, so I was like, I kind of want to direct, but so does anyone. So get in line, kid. So I did not know what I wanted to do, and I'll admit that now. It was just a little bit strange, but I think that it's doubtful that anyone goes out with certainty knowing what one's career is. It sounds like it's a little bit of an exception for you, but you never know. Maybe you would have hated decorating. You would have hated props.
I think one of the best things about working your way up in this industry is actually seeing what other positions do. I wanted to be a production designer, and I sort of set that path, and then got to a point where, I'm on the path, and now I don't want to do it anymore, and had to kind of start over. So, and that was only because working in an art department, I got to see what positions were really doing, and not just the titles. In art, and even in editing, you have titles of people you don't really know. You have sound mixing, you have editing mixing, you have so many things going on that you really got to work in it to see.
Yeah, so many of my friends were bouncing around different parts of the industry in a way that if you had told 42-year-old me that all these people would have had all these different careers, I would have thought that was insane. But now looking back on it, it was even I was at Griffin Electric, and I was, probably, like, I was scrawny. I was probably about, 20 pounds thinner, and not like in a good way. Like I had no muscle. And,
Right.
So I had no business heading up at like a 12K. Like there were a couple of times where like I worked on a tiny movie. Peter Stormare was like the executive producer of when I first moved out here with a couple of friends, and after a week I got fired, and it was just because I was too skinny. Like they're like, we're sorry, you're gonna, it's for your own good, son. Yeah, you're gonna hurt yourself.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it was cool. Like, and Jeremy's sister was just randomly in it. He's a sweetheart. So it was a little.
I always think Jeremy's sister's like Kiss of Death. Like whatever he's in is like. You got about 5 episodes before they pull the plug. Like
I know, and this was an indie film, so it's just finished the thing in probably 20 days, and that was it. Right. So I worked on that for a couple of weeks, and I was a little down, because I kind of thought I wanted to get into sound editing, and I will say that in a strange way I did, because my career is comprehensive. I think would be the how you would put it. My career is a very comprehensive one now, currently. But some of my friends, I remember, like my friend Matt Taylor, who still is, bless him, he's probably one of the most gifted re-recording mixers that I've ever met, and he got his Emmy last year, which is awesome.
Oh, fantastic!
Absolutely amazing. So. All these people working on these different shows, and no, I'm sorry, he was an Oscar. My God, he got an Oscar. So I gotta look that up.
Well, whatever. I mean, it's Oscar, Emmy. It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. No, it's not. So, I started to see all my friends trying out a zillion different things, which again, if you looked at it now in my 40s, it would have seemed almost like diminishing returns. I would see my friends who were kind of getting into the sound guys and be like, I think I'm going to go join Local 600, which of course is cinematographers union. I want to become a cameraman, but do sound, but do this. And so it was just kind of a shotgun approach to our careers, and we would all just kind of sit around, late at night at Barney's Beanery and just kind of, play Woe Is Me and trying to, figure out navigating this terra incognita of our careers.
I miss Barney's.
And after a couple of months of me just bouncing around being Griffin Electric, I worked on a couple of USC films actually as well, like some Starkey ones, so big budget films, and people who were like in grad school, and of course they're some of them have had amazing careers actually since then. Like Jafar Mahmood, actually, I worked on his thing, and he actually is a huge TV director now. Kevin Burke was a sound guy and was really a very gifted re-recording mixer and music supervisor and all this other stuff. And he ended up now he runs he's a showrunner, but something like 5 or 6 different animated series right now, and he still does it with his friend Chris Doc Wyatt, and it's just like all these friends who all hung out and made movies in college, and now they're just doing this for a profession, which that's amazing.
Oh yeah, it's totally
all
amazing.
of us, all we want to do is just make movies with our friends. And so these young men and women have myself included have been blessed with the tools to persevere, and we have careers because of it. So that's amazing. But then I finally found I walked into a job almost literally in post-production just because of a confluence of circumstances where my mother's college roommate, her brother, was out here. He was a TV and movie trailer editor who was making the transition, again, career transitions, making the transition in his 50s into being a voiceover artist. And his name is Phil Terrence, and he still works. He's probably one of the, he's one of the greats at this point.
Wow.
A lot of these very talented announcers, unfortunately, have passed on. There's like Don LaFontaine in A World, and a lot of these guys are kind of they're in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and they're retiring and or passing away. So Phil Terrence is climbing the ranks in a kind of a grim sort of way. So we kept on trying to get lunch together, and he was trying to find me a job in post production. He didn't know what to really do, and then he finally had to cancel lunch again. But he said, I will tell you that I was just at a place, and I'm pretty sure it's like around the corner from where'd you say you lived? And at the time I lived in trashy ass Burbank, and I told him kind of where I lived, and he goes, "Oh my God, they're around the corner from you, and they're losing their assistant. He's becoming an editor. Why don't you call this number?" And it was a place that at the time it was called Celluloid Heroes, and the CEO was a guy named Jordan Levine, and he runs a place in Hollywood now that's it's called Stampede Studios. And he told me, it would be great for you to come in. It sounds like you're brand new to this town, and let's just see what you can do. So they gave me a job. It was a union shop, so they gave me kind of this sort of non-union, off-the-books assistant editor job, and there was kind of a little bit of a word salad with that Biatzi would probably not love. But instead of me being an assistant editor, which is of course a union position, but they do this with a lot of guys starting out. They called me a finisher, which means that I was sort of this strange last line of defense, and I would have to basically take every ounce of coffee that my body could absorb and just become this sort of paranoid jackass all day. That would be my responsibilities were pretty vast, and it was in a way still the hardest thing I had to ever do, because I had to learn trial by fire, because they started me off in a very busy time. Let me just describe the shop very quickly. So this was, compared to many of these other large trailer houses, like Trailer Park, that everyone knows because it has the biggest sign ever. Right. It's kind of near the CNN Tower on Sunset Boulevard. It's kind of near I think it's near like Sunset and Highland. And those places have 100 edit bays and 30 assistants, and they have like probably 15 petabyte servers and all this it's like, oh my God, they have like probably 3 floors. It's just crazy. I've worked at a lot of these giant huge companies before. This one was 5 edit bays, 1 chem, which is kind of like a 35 millimeter little flatbed editor that it's compared to a Steenbeck. It's this German one, and then it was some gal answering the phone, and and 4 editors, and then Jordan, who's like the principal of the company, and then myself, this only assistant editor. So tiny shop, and some gal would come in every week and just do a payroll. Like it was.
But don't you think that's better? Don't you think it's better that you were in something like that rather than the big, McDonald's of it all?
I don't know. So I have an identical twin. Just like you have 2 identical twins. Yeah. So I have an identical twin, and people ask me what it's like to grow up with a twin, and I always kind of I always kind of answer in a very coy way, compared to what, because that's something that personally is unknowable. I will never know what it would have been like if I got an assistant editor job like at Pilgrim Studios in North Hollywood, and I was there for a couple of years, and then they moved me up. I mean, it probably would have been very similar, but in this case, I was glad I started off in this very niche of scripted content, because I will say that, in case anyone is unaware, it's rare for editors to kind of bounce out of their lanes. So let's say that, like, if someone is a scripted editor, it's rare that they would become a promo and trailer editor. It's something that is considered. It would be considered just kind of
your
rare.
Niche. It's almost like your niche, and people don't let you out of that.
Yeah, I would say that. Now, are there exceptions? Of course, there's exceptions to everything. That's great, but at the same time, I will say that it was kind of a fun thing to work in this neat little part of the trailer world and understand that it's like this 2 minutes of content is really cool, and it's really neat, but I had to learn how to work with film, how to work with videotape, how to work with standard definition, which was all they had at the time. And then this new HD thing was coming out, so it was just all these different formats and tapes, and to this day I will say that it was hardest thing I had to do, because there was so much to learn in a very, very short amount of time. And frankly, I had to also make those little mistakes that one also makes in college, but I had to make them at an entry-level job where it was okay that I was, making dumb mistakes and not getting fired.
Well, yeah. I mean, but don't you think also the people who you were working with were in your position at one time too? I mean,
everyone.
Yeah.
Again, some of them not, but the thing is, you can actually tell now. Almost 20 years into my career, I can actually tell to this day the people who were never assistant editors, and that's just because they're kind of generally many of them are not very tech savvy, and I will say with certainty that many of them are not very organized, and that is very problematic. Organization is it's next to godliness in this because something that we always talk about is it's a bit of a dark thing, of course, but whenever we have a project organized, then we're always just like, any of us could just get in back when this is of course during a pandemic, and where we are all working from home when we can, but when we worked at offices, then it's like we would always be making sure that everything is organized, because it's a grim prospect, but what if I get in a car wreck on the way home? What if I'm injured tomorrow? What if it's worse?
Right.
What if it's like, where is this stuff? It's critical to know where someone's latest work is in a digital environment. So
luckily in this profession that we have, you can never have a sick day. You can never really have a personal day, or like your brother's wedding or something. Like, you can't really have any sort of life outside of this, because that camera's rolling.
Yeah, it is. And I used to think that. I used to think that, but later on in my career, I started to kind of have this notion of saying, that I actually can take some personal time, and I think that's actually very important. That was one of my most important things later in life, especially in my late 30s, where I started to say, do I really want to completely, constantly work my butt off on every single job? Well, of course we do, but should there be a work-life balance? Absolutely, and that was one of the things I had to learn later in my career.
Yeah.
So I was, having said that, Kama, I did probably some of the longest hours in my professional career ever, working at Celluloid Heroes. I still have like an invoice. Let's say I used to kind of invoice the company, even though I was, on the payroll, but they would need to know, especially for records, how long certain jobs would take. And even though we were a place that made movie trailers, we made a documentary once with this director who was kind of newer at the time, and now a lot of people know this guy in the horror world. His name's Mike Mendez, and it just one of the funniest, goofiest guys to work with. And he was like, I have this hell of a movie, and it's called Masters of Horror, which of course Showtime made an entire series.
Oh yeah,
called Masters of Horror, but it was sort of loosely based on this documentary, and it was the documentary was technically, I think, a sequel to another documentary about horror movies. And it was hosted by Bruce Campbell. So they shot Bruce Campbell over at one of those spooky shops over in Burbank, and then we started the task of understanding, like what I was saying before, that Mike Mendez is a hell of a director, but he is not a very organized editor. And we realized he had cut quite a bit of the documentary on his own on these little videotapes. And he did it on a program that's called Final Cut Pro, which is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of the editing world that no one wants to talk about, because it's a little bit loosey-goosey. And we realized that out of the, 90 tapes or so that he had digitized, he had labeled every one of those tape 001.
What?
So, and God bless him, he just didn't know. But we were like, we had to do this thing that is called overcutting, which means that I had to, and this actually was my job. That means you have to visually eye match, every single shot using the master tape. Again, you have to take a cut from like this other program that has no reference point at all. You have to figure out what tape it came from. You have to actually go and by eye, you have to match up
Because whatever tape he had, it wasn't the complete scene. Like he divided.
He wasn't really using the master tape. He wasn't really using full resolution. So we had to bring the tape in again, with the proper reference and something that we call time code, which of course is a computer generated code that corresponds with something called VITC. It's kind of laid in on the videotape so that later when we're getting ready to finish the show, we can go back and reference it at a much higher resolution, and we can redigitize the tape that way. But maybe I should take the moment to actually talk about what the responsibilities are. And should we talk about now how a show is edited?
Well, yeah, I was gonna get to that and first, who hires you?
Sure, yeah.
Because I know, like, lately, I feel like when I start a project, a couple weeks later, the editor's already starting because now they can edit so quickly, the dailies and everything, they're getting a jump on everything. So editors are in pretty quickly. Like, post is there.
Yeah, but of course we know why, and that's because if there ever a problem and you had to reshoot something, you need to know pretty damn fast. In the past, we would get, the film would go into the bath overnight. You would get work prints. It would have to get digitized, and then it would go. This is the recent past.
People would get dailies, the next day or day after. I feel like I'm thinking just when I worked on Bones, and that was mid 2000s, late 2000s. Yeah. We would get dailies. I mean, it's not like, it's not archaic. I'm just saying. Now it's it's almost by the end of day they have what they just shot and can look at it overnight. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, they can. I mean, my friend Mark Vulcan is he is so good at he and his wife work. He works over at eFilm in Atlanta now, and he and his wife moved to that Atlanta office. But before that, he was so good at color correcting dailies, which is something that was not done until probably the last 10 years. He was so good at color correcting dailies, Roger Deakins would literally fly his ass all over the planet to do this. He was the only one that Roger Deakins, who of course is probably one of the most prolific cinematographers ever, he was the only one that you trusted.
Do you think that being able to get these dailies and edits quicker is harder because now you have more time and more eyes can get on it, whereas before maybe the editors had time to really work with the takes and work with the scenes rather than the input of it's I don't know, too many eyes on it now? Do you think that is a thing?
That's a good question. From what I do know, let's say that I do know that producers do sometimes to this day, they like to take a peek at but they also want to see how everything's running on set. They want to work with UPM. They want to make sure that I would say that the producers do check in early on in the edit process, especially still while shooting. Now, so we were just talking about that technology and how it's changed. I think now is a good time for me to kind of talk about kind of this strange moment that happened a little over 9 years ago. And it was March 11th of 2011. And it was one of the darkest days, in my industry, to say the least. And that was because, something that was kind of unthinkable changed the industry very quickly, similarly to this pandemic, really. But it was devastating. And it was there was a little area on the planet, which is, I think, closest to a place that I think you call it Tohoku in northern Japan, and the mighty hand of God, offline and destroyed the 6 videotape factories on the planet that make videotape. And they also killed about 19,000 Japanese people in this tsunami. And, I remember it really was kind of like life imitating art. And it was like out of a movie, because I was working at this place at the time called Three Ball Productions, which is where that was the place that did things like The Biggest Loser, and I was working on another show at the time. And all of these phone banks. I was my office. We all have private offices, of course, because we would drive people crazy with all the noise. So my office was kind of near these phone banks where all these post-production supervisors for each show, and there were probably about 5 or 6 shows going on at the time, and a couple of TV pilots. And I saw every phone ring at the same time. And
God.
all these people just kind of, and my door was open, and so I could see just these strange looks that people were giving. And on the other end of the line, it was people probably at Comtel Media or something up in Burbank, which is a huge warehouse of videotape. And it's like all of these vendors just calling each post saying, okay, I can't raise anyone in northern Japan. I think they're dead. I don't know when I can get you any new tape. I have 4,000 loads now. I can give you 4,000 loads, camera loads. I can give you 6,000 camera loads for Loser of this format. I can give you, 2,000 of IMX, 60-minute IMX camera loads.
And I'm sure the price went up.
100 HDK SR Masters at this price. And then I don't know when I'm getting any more. Got it? And we just kind of, we're all just like shaking. We're like, Jesus Christ, like 20,000 people are dead. We're watching this shit on the news. And we're like, what happens when we run out of tape?
Yes.
And, so it became, and this is where we started to see the adaptation.
Because you can't reuse the tapes?
Well, you can. It was called, what did they call it? Oh my gosh, I should have.
I mean...
it was called evaluated stock, which means it was a kind of a fancy, ambiguous term, which would mean that they checked out, sort of like spot checked the integrity of a tape to make sure, and like, I don't remember how they did this, but this is what E did a lot, where, of course, E had all these daily programs, so they would actually blow over like masters of like Talk Soup and stuff. It was like they were like, no one's gonna watch that again. It was like they would just have this reevaluated stock, and they would blow over it a few times, and I think there were check boxes of how many times they had taped over it.
Oh my
and
God.
that was about it. Yeah, so, but that was one side of the adaptation. There was another side of the adaptation that was, relatively new, where people were taking, they were moving to cards. So they were taking, especially at this time, was when DSLRs, which is of course, kind of this digital single lens reflex cameras, which are, they made these Canon cameras, instead of like having sort of these professional huge big body cameras, and you could actually take these fancy little HD cameras and set them up in the field, and it would look sort of cinematic and not like a news finder sort of thing. So that actually afforded the possibility of this thing that we call run and gun in the field, and especially in reality shows, where that was where we would see these Alaska shows coming up, and you would have these GoPros, and you would have one producer just running around in the field and mounting like mounting a DSLR on a plane, and having another one on a rig, and having like a couple of GoPros, and he would just throw everything in a backpack that was muddy and full of ice, and they would come back weeks later and be like, I got a story, and so they would kind of grab all this footage, and we would put it onto hard drives, and the hard drives were an archive, and the hard drives were being shelved, and then that would be transferred over onto a server, and we would have backups of everything, and then it would go to another backup at the end of the show. But that was how we had to adapt within, I would say, only a matter of maybe 2 months. We had to learn how to do this. Yeah, it was fast.
And do you think, like, jumping ahead with, like you were saying, like GoPros and like how everything is advanced, that you have enormous amounts of footage now when you edit?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, would you like to kind of talk about the numbers on that?
Oh yeah, I would love to hear that. Okay. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
it's got to be insane.
Okay, like in the scripted world, Terrence Malick notwithstanding, I'm looking at you, Terry Malick. I love your films, but my God, do you know how many? Okay, the guy shot 1 million feet of film. He shot 1 million feet of film for The Thin Red Line. He made basically 12 movies, because on average, I would say most films shoot about 150,000 feet of film, and let's say that you're shooting usually on, what would you say? Maybe it's, for the scripted world, maybe a 5-to-1 ratio. And by this ratio, I mean how much you've shot versus how much actually ends up in the damn movie.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. It depends. It depends. Oh yeah, I mean, it depends on what show you are, but I would think 30% on average is edited out, just timing and story cuts and shit like that. Yeah.
And especially on TV shows.
Yeah.
If you're doing a feature, then of course a feature is, I think that they're a little more liberal with budget, obviously, so they tend to shoot more. They tend to spend sometimes a little bit more on certain scene work, but that's changing too. But one thing that I saw constantly in the TV world, especially reality TV, which was amazing, was that because unscripted requires someone to navigate the story in a giant sea of footage. We shoot anywhere from a ratio of 10 to sometimes 50 to 1. We shoot basically all day with several cameras. I mean, I'll give kind of like the biggest...
So for every minute that airs, there's 50 minutes not aired?
That's correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah. And that's on the low end. I mean, shit, I've worked on some of those Alaska shows where you just swear that they just set up cameras like for like a couple of years and just come up with like a ratio of 75 hours for every one. I've seen things like that where it's just there's people who go out there and their job is literally to set up time lapses and just hang out and share a joint with somebody.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no boundary for it, especially in like editing Expedition Unknown. You're almost, I mean, you have the scenes sort of set up in some sort of script, I'm thinking, but there's plenty of unknown that you're just trying to capture for the moment, the second of it.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm under NDA on most of these shows, of course, but I could say that I think I could probably explain that a show like Expedition Unknown, which is of course still on with Josh Gates, and is produced by Ping Pong Productions for Discovery. Now, it was the flagship of Travel Channel in 2017. Travel Channel was bought up for $12 billion by Discovery in order to compete with their direct competitor, which is A&E Networks, which owns History Channel, of course. But when we were working, and then they all the good stuff that was on Travel percolated over into primetime Discovery. So that's how that happened. But working on that show, off and on over the last 5 years, that's actually, let's just say, for obvious reasons, we go into that show planning for a number of months, and this is something that everyone who knows that show knows, because there's plenty of behind the scenes stuff where if you work on that show, you're in the movie, kid. Like the crew is in the show all the time. But I would say a show like that, for obvious reasons, you have to plan it ahead of time and know kind of your subject matter and know whom you're going to be meeting with. And you have to know scene by scene with the logistics of flights and all this other stuff and passports. You have to know kind of what you're going in and doing. But at the same time, no, we don't know what the hell we're doing on Expedition Unknown. My friends Jesse and Mark edited this season that's airing now, and I did a couple of pieces of it this past January as well. But I mean, yeah, they edited an episode that has aired at this time, and where there was a guy who bought up some land in Normandy, and after all these years, after 75 years, he was like, "What's that pipe?" And he found out that it was a giant network of German bunkers. We didn't know that. It's like, no, yeah, it's like we knew that was there, but we opened a couple of them that had never been opened in 75 years. So and I actually got the privilege to work on an episode where the Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who was a sultan in the 1500s and was probably the most important part of the Ottoman Empire. Where we actually discovered this crypt. That's now in Hungary, actually. And we discovered it on camera, and it was just one of the most incredible, touching things to really see the sort of boyish excitement that everyone loves about Josh Gates, because it's sort of like this great, big American spirit, and a guy that has like a huge smile, but also that show wouldn't work without Josh at all, because he's also the executive producer of the show, and I guarantee you that man knows every frame that was shot. He has a very, very good photographic memory, and he knows everything that was done.
Well, and that's probably tremendously helpful, and not
But then, so let's look back at a show that's actually on the air again now on USA, which is called The Biggest Loser.
Yeah.
And which was created back in 2004. But it was sold to NBC by Ben Silverman.
I think
and J.D. Roth.
I watched almost every season until they got rid of Jillian, and then I kind of was like on and off. And then I have this season recorded, but I haven't, or I can DVR it, whatever. But I haven't watched it yet.
So that was one of those shows where. This is a long time ago, so I'm sure it's okay for me to say, but they were, the first season of that show, unbeknownst to most people, that was actually started off as being kind of a smaller show, where NBC was like, yeah, it might be cute, it might be fine. And so I don't think it had aired yet, but I think that no, that's not what had happened. It was not airing yet, but they started to look at some of the cuts, and they were realizing that what they had was gold, and that they were like, this has the potential to be as big.
Well, yeah. You get to that second, third
which is
week.
Survivor, of course, on CBS.
You get to that second, third week of like when the people plateau and they're working their balls off and they're crying and it's a sin. That's good TV.
And it was amazing. It's good TV. So, and that was sold without a pilot or anything like that. So it was just, they just knew that at the time, they just knew that, what do you call it? They knew that that J.D. Roth was a very capable producer. J.D. Roth, of course, we know him as being this teenage host from Nickelodeon from the 80s.
Funhouse.
And then became this kind of TV producer and mogul, and I'm still very close with him to this day. He's still producing TV, and
or was it Finders Keepers? It was Finders Keepers, I think.
I think he did that, but he also did Funhouse.
Oh, it was
he
Funhouse,
was host of TV's on Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
And a few other things, and he also was is still very chummy to this day with Mark Summers from Double Dare, and I got to meet the man once.
Oh, that's a good one.
We I was an assistant editor under him, and then I became an editor, and I loved working with that guy. I just saw him a few months ago before the pandemic, and it felt like old times. It really is good to it's just all smiles. I think that at that time in 2004, NBC looked at some of the cuts and looked at some of the stuff that they had, and they're like, oh my God, here's more money. So then it went from, I don't know, maybe about a 4-camera show and to a 9-camera show. And by what am I talking about here? What I'm talking about is multicam editing, where if you're trying to think about it in a sense of, you're trying to think about multicam editing in a sense of sort of recording these amazing moments, just like they do in a scripted show, but because of the volume of that, then you can imagine how much content you can get.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have you start out with 10 contestants. You got to watch them work out. Yeah. You're literally you are watching 10 people one day. That's 10 days. You know what I mean? I don't know. That's how I think of it. Of where they were with that trainer, and now they're with this trainer, and now you got to go through all of this footage just to get that one bead of sweat that came down perfectly to show how hard that guy's working out.
So let's talk about that number for a second.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. I just pulled out. I know I sound distracted for a second. So it's because I pulled out my calculator on my iPhone. So let's say that we got 9 cameras that are running. Let's say that they're shooting most of the time. Out of if they're shooting on 12s. So let's say that each camera shoots. Let's say each camera shoots 9 videotapes. So that's 81 hours a day. So you're shooting 81 hours. 81 tapes a day, 81 loads. So you're shooting 9 hours of tape with 9 cameras. Now, so let's say that you're shooting 5 days a week. That's 405 tapes. Now, Biggest Loser shoots for about, I'll just say, several months. I don't want to reveal exactly how long.
I think it's 3 months. It's 12 weeks or something.
I would say it's normally around 10 to 12. That's about 12 to 14 weeks. I would say. So let's just go on the low end, and so that's 405 tapes a week times 12, and that is 4,860 hours of television, Kim.
That's insane. That's insane.
I mean, we were talking about the tape thing earlier. I mean, do you want to know what that looks like? It's hallways full of tape.
Well,
it's hallways full of camera loads.
But and, so when you have that, how many editors do you have on that show?
I would say that's let's say it's on the bigger side. I don't want to completely reveal it, but I would say that we were usually around between 6 to 8 editors. And we would have a staggered start, and we would have about probably one lead assistant editor, or if it's a more complicated show, we would have 2 lead assistant editors who, of course, work daytime. And those things, especially back then, those avid media composers we were talking about that were $70,000 each, and the rental on them was probably about $1,200 back then. It's probably still around the same to get the desk, and so on a weekly rental, you better believe those things are expensive. You've got to you have to work those things hard and put them away wet every night. So assistant editors would be working largely at night digitizing these tapes, and it becomes it's a thankless job, but it's a very important one to run around and throw all these tapes in, and then set the resolution. You hit the big red button on Avid, which means you're recording the tape, and it runs through the whole thing. And then you have to group all of these, which means, of course, like let's say that, especially if you're shooting an event that's being covered at the same location by several angles, then we are grouping the footage together so that we can look simultaneously at a contemporaneous event, and we can see all of these different cameras that are covering the event, hopefully quite well. So, when you're putting together this show, what we do is after we group and organize this footage, then a team of people that we call story producers. The story producers will go through the footage initially. Now, this is not really something that's done in the scripted world. In the scripted world, that editor's job is to know every frame of footage, but that's because they're only shooting a few hours of footage, at most for each scene. It's not very complicated. An editor worth the salt should know what's been shot. And in a case like this, editors are expensive. So they have these people, the story team of story producers and story editors, which the story producer works above the story editor in the unscripted world. And they will lay out, and a lot of times the story producer is the person who is in the field. They will lay out kind of a rough version of each scene or each act of television. And so let's say that you had a scene like in Biggest Loser that was an elimination, which is usually those eliminations were usually about 7 or 8 minutes on the clock for air. Yeah, I'd say about 7 or 8 minute scene. It's very tense toward the end of a 2-hour show. But then a string out of that would hopefully be maybe 100% fat. So you talked about like maybe a 15-minute string out would be an ideal length, and then I would cut together like kind of a rough version of that. I would say a good editor can cut, in the unscripted world at least, can cut together roughly 3 to 4 minutes on average of decent content per day. Mm-hmm. Now that actually is a little slower than the scripted world. I would say the scripted world, you can probably get to a rough cut, you probably get, I would say, probably 6 or 7 minutes a day. Wow. And that's just because, and then you have to go back and finesse it. But the friends of mine who have worked in the scripted world on TV shows, they say on average it's roughly around 6 or 7 minutes that you can crank out a day. So it's quite a bit faster, but not like, it's still, it takes some time to get something right.
When you have, let's say, 8 editors working together on all of this footage, how does continuity play in that? Like
poorly. No, I'm kidding.
I think so. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, good question. So let's talk about not just continuity, but by continuity, do you mean visually or just the story itself?
Well, I think visually. First off, I mean, story-wise, I think, especially with like competition reality or you were saying like story editors, you have the ending that you want to get to, and you're doing this editing of build-up to get to that. Yes. So that I would assume in continuity-wise, you're doing whatever you can, because even like, look, I watch a lot of Housewives. There's a lot of like editing of like looking at everyone's reaction to what this bitch just said.
Yeah.
You know, and it did. You know that didn't happen. Like she went, and then they went, and then she looked like, you know. So I get that, but I
so
guess
are we misrepresenting? So first of all, are we compressing time? Yes, absolutely. That's well within the rules.
Right.
Are we making someone look possibly better or bitchier or something than they are? Yes, we can actually do that. I can't change the very core personality of somebody in an unscripted world. But you know, it's this is to say that we do misrepresent occasionally, misrepresenting a story. I'll say generally that's something that has been done, and is that ethical? Well, we all know that we all know the United States Marine Corps and how they have they have this sort of they have a lot of these they have a lot of acronyms in the Navy, of course, but everyone knows USMC, and whenever people are complaining and getting butthurt about certain things in the Marine Corps, I've heard that this phrase going around saying it actually stands for "you signed the motherfucking contract."
Yeah.
So
well, it's not really reality that the housewives are getting 2 hours.
Here too. So
they're getting 2 hours of makeup before they do scenes, and I'm sure even with like Biggest Loser, the enhancement of the workouts and everything, and like, I don't know, like you're probably coming into a lot of it towards the end of the workout when people are really tired and you're showing how they're struggling and shit. So yeah, but that's part of why you're watching it. You know, I want to see them made up. I kind of don't want to see them without makeup, and I want to see these people sweat. You know what I mean? It's like, that's why I'm watching it.
But to get that little 5-minute montage scene, for example, and montages are of course a really excellent tool that we use to kind of pass through an act of television. So we're talking about something like we're covering some simultaneous action that's happening concurrently with all of these different characters that we know in the show, and we are trying to move the story ahead together with these characters. Now, let's say that's a 5-minute scene, so that's probably going to be at least maybe a couple hours of footage, to get get the best shots of that's in focus, right, or something that's that has that's showing someone showing someone's teeth gritting, or or God forbid there's like some kind of an accident or something. On my actual website, then there's one scene that I had that's kind of the opposite of that, where I think I have one of the intros for The Ultimate Fighter. I loved working on that on season 21 because it was this amazing controversial season because they really broke form, and they decided to shoot. They decided to shoot not in Vegas, and they shot down in Florida, and they were using different teams and stuff like that. So casting wise, it was just a bit of a departure. But that was only they really had at most only a couple of cameras covering that. It was so they had a very light crew. So, but it makes for a lot more dramatic moments because the audience is kind of having to find the story with someone running all around. With a single camera, it makes for a much more dramatic thing than it would for like a 9-camera show.
Right,
and by that I mean toward the end of one of these teases that I was working on, then yes, we absolutely had. Unfortunately, we had one of the fighters in our cast, named Steve Montgomery. He had an accident with hydration, which is what a lot of fighters do when they are cutting weight to make that 170 weight, and this guy is 6'3", so getting down to 170 is largely artificial. Let's say it's using a lot of things, but he unfortunately drank way too much distilled water, and when you are doing that, you're not hydrating yourself. There's no minerals, and your body can't absorb it. So he basically became dehydrated. And on camera, we had someone literally running with his camera while he was seizing in his bed.
Oh,
and
my God.
He's fine now. He's totally fine. But when that happens, there was a bit of a speed bump in his career because, with you seize, you cannot fight for, I think, 6 months or a year. Poor Steve.
When you get, I'm sure it's not just in that show, but in editing, you must have a line sometimes, especially when you're editing reality. You must have a line of like, is that too personal, or does that really relate to this show, or should we show...
Okay, yeah, that's true. So we do know, of course, that doesn't really apply necessarily to reality TV, but it kind of does. With where in 1995 on the Jenny Jones show, then there was a man. This didn't ever air. The event happened between the taping and this event, and it is true that this guy had a secret crush on his friend and neighbor, and the friend and neighbor it was homosexual, and the friend and neighbor was heterosexual and had some mental problems, but he did murder this man in the days after the filming, and it was kind of there was a question of ethics of saying, did this company go too far? Was this wrong?
Right.
Yeah. And there's people, especially in the early days of reality shows, people were asking how if this was ethical, and that's why, especially in some of my earlier shows that I was working on, we did actually have those questions of like, are we moving the goalposts? Are we kind of screwing around with people? We've asked ourselves is this ethical? Do we have to really show something like this? And right. I think that I will just kind of respond to certain vagary and say, that there's some networks I've seen where they have said some things that I really think are sometimes not the most ethical thing, not the most ethical answer. And then there's other times that I think that we in large part have made the right call.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a thin line, and I mean, and thin, and by I mean thin, it's like, a second too long, or 2 seconds too long, and you're holding that shot, or you're holding that just too long to make it uncomfortable, or abusing that person, or whatever. I mean, it's a huge responsibility.
Yeah. I'll just kind of talk about the biggest example of when I really knew this was kind of a problem, and that was when I was a lead assistant editor on a show that had a couple seasons on MTV that was called Breaking Bonaducci, and that show. So this is 2005, right? So that show, we had a conversation about it, and I'll just say the pilot that we had that had been shot. This was when Danny was sober, and it was, let's just say that without giving anything away, I'll say it was a very different show. It was very tame. It was kind of, let's just kind of say there may have been some moments of that was very light. It made the Osbournes, which was on at the time, look heavy. Like it was it was just like, why is Danny look, Danny Bonaducci's delivering a pizza on an Aston Martin? Oh man, he's crazy. Like, oh man, is he gonna go in and eat the pizza with the people? That's nuts. Why is he doing that? And then we started to shoot the first season of the show, and the guy was like, and this was on camera, and it was actually, was shown, so I could say, yeah, that was very real, and he was injecting something into his arms that had the picture of a horse on it, and it's because he was doing the roids. He was doing lots and lots and lots of roids, and he had been he also, decided to break his sobriety. And he did it on camera very much in front of us. And he kind of knew that he loved being a spectacle. And then he would have these horrible fights with, his wife at the time, who was named Gretchen. And, there's, that was all, of course, displayed. You could watch that show for yourself 15 years ago if you find it. And where he
ripped the camera it was a train wreck.
He ripped the camera out of the hands of a young woman who was our cameraman. I think she was our Steadicam operator. And he ran and just, yelled at his wife in the closet with a company camera. There's my friend Bill Hockhauser was like a lot of people thought it was fake. He would get into fights with Danny, and on camera in the middle of the night, and then he would be on the phone with our executive producer Troy Sear, who has had a huge career ever since then. So we were all younger people that were just kind of like going,
What is this?
The Post Soup at the time was saying, okay, I'm going to remind you guys have been really good about Biggest Loser, about not saying who's losing a lot of weight. You're not telling your spouses this. People aren't going to Vegas betting on Biggest Loser. But they're like, we're going to remind you that you're under NDA for this thing. So, that you cannot talk about this thing, until it airs. But, it's like this guy is doing these things that are, sort of criminal acts. And, we're not going to charge him for, getting steroids and shooting up on camera. But Jesus, this guy is doing self-destructive behavior. Don't tell your spouses about this. And we're like, okay. So it was, it was a weird show to work on because there was kind of a question of, at what point do we step in? And,
I think that's your biggest problem is like morally, a lot of times, with the show like Intervention, and you have all of that, and that helps people, and it definitely helps families of people who have drug problems and how to deal with them. So it's not that it's all bad and we're all bad people for watching them. It is examples of this behavior that, if you didn't see it, you wouldn't believe it type thing.
Yeah, and it's something where, there's a question of, and then of course there's people who on the other end of things are, where there's people who accuse, reality shows of being almost completely fabricated and silly. And that was a kind of a different thing that had started. I would place that roughly around 2009 is when you started to see some shows that I may or may not have worked on, but some shows that were clearly utter fabrications and people didn't care. And then and then eventually the biggest version of that sort of is Dynasty, which was on A&E, and it was, that was pulling numbers of like insane numbers, 8 million and things like that. Yeah. And now that was, everyone knows that is, it was a complete fabrication, but that's on a reality show. It's a reality show format. It's a comedy. It's so, and then things started to become more real again. And so there are all these different iterations, and it was important. I think it's important. I would always urge editors, especially newer ones starting out, to know how to cut these different kinds of formats of shows, because if someone looks on your resume, they say, well, it's something that we call a build show, for example, which is like those car shows on Discovery. So if you don't really know how to cut one of these kinds of shows, then you're not going to get the job and someone else is. So even though it's uncomfortable to constantly be looking for work and looking for a new show, it's also, I could have cut on Biggest Loser for 15 years.
Right.
I could have. And I know people who did. It was very cushy, but getting off that, getting off a big run of that. And then it's like, what if you only had one show on your resume? That's not good.
Oh no, I know. I definitely think I stayed at Bones too long, but and you lose context and you lose, just working with different people and different rhythms you get into with other shows, and you gotta move around.
And and also finding navigating your career path over a number of years with a lot of the same people, and so it's about finding a really good team. I mean, I just came off of a show where a friend of mine was the showrunner on it, and I've known him longer than I've known my husband, and that's 16 years. So it's just kind of this funny thing where the people who are problematic to work with, let's say, they're the ones where you just I don't know where they're at, but word gets around town, just like any industry. Word gets around town. It's like, oh, that guy, oh, that gal. It's like not good to work with. You don't play well with others. It's not good. But then you talk about how we work as a team, just like how you work with as a team, and you have your, and you have your gang boss and all this other crews, and you're working with people.
I have years, my Ethan.
Yeah, and like with Ethan, but who of course is my husband and was on the show a few episodes ago. But how it works with these teams and story producers, we already discussed. Sort of how we plan the arc of the story, and then we have what's shot, and then we have the string out. Then during the editing process, in a perfect world, let's say that we would have 3 cuts that would go out, which it would say rough cut, locked cut, fine cut, that very rarely happens. It's normally far more edits and revisions that go up the chain internally than they go out to the network. The network, usually has several contradictory notes that we have to go through and figure out, and then we adjust. In some cases, we reshoot if we have to, and
right.
That's it. So in that process, I am working with a story producing team of varying scales that are doing one of two things for me, and where they are usually either working ahead and following the story, in later acts of a TV show, for example, or they're helping me find certain shots that are addressing notes. Or and again, this is post string out process when I'm going through and say, hey, that's good, that's not working. Or they're doing something else that is known quite well in the industry, which is where I'm working with sound bites, and we are editing these bites together in a very in a very kind of difficult way, and it's something that we call Frankenbiting, where we are it's like Frankenstein's monster. That's kind of like where that portmanteau comes from. So there's other things like music, for example.
Right. Like, are you editing music in, or that's the music editor? Like, are you giving your cut over to, like, your final cut over, and then music is put in, and then that's
bigger show? Like especially like a Star Wars movie or something like that. Absolutely, it's a whole other department in many
right.
ways, and then they're working with, let's say, more temporary tracks.
Right,
is what they are. But for a guy like me, okay, unscripted editors, we have to wear a lot of hats. We have to wear all the hats. We have to put together in some cases effects, titles. We have to put together like all these very, very complicated things. Basically, it's almost like being the director, sort of. It's where we're given an incredible amount of agency over.
You're the post director.
Yeah, well, and that's a whole other job, actually. But it's, but being an editor, I know what you mean. Where you have to actually go through the steps of not only creating this, this good story, roughing it out, smoothing it down. Usually, concurrently, you are scoring it with music. You are putting in sound effects. You're putting in just all these pieces that. Okay, so those like shows that they shoot for Discovery, like up in Alaska, that are just big shows, or like a big build show for Discovery, especially. They love their big crazy openings with big time lapses and aerial shots and things, and especially
right.
because of drones. I mean, like even just 10 short years ago, if you asked a producer for aerial shots, he would have told you to go fuck yourself, because it was about 20 grand for a helicopter and a mount.
There's too much drone footage now. You need your own like drone editor.
There's drone footage for everything, which is amazing. But it's we have to put together so much, and we have to use like especially sound effects, and there's a lot of terms for it, but one thing that we call it is layering, we're adding just a little bit of texture to it, and then we have to go through and do a kind of a rough mix on this as well, which is of course someone else's professional job to professionally mix something, or professionally do visual effects, or professionally do color correction. But sometimes we have to do sort of rough passes at all of this, or we have to make we have to go through and make these sound effects really work, and we have to figure out what this is going to look like in the finished product, which is what we call online editing, which is a kind of a throwback term to just to putting these. Remember what we were talking about an hour ago with tape to tape? It's where it's basically taking, in the old world, we were taking several decks in a giant machine room and literally putting the show together shot by shot. It's obviously done digitally now, and we just kind of relink to the high res footage, and someone with a color correction system will color correct it, and at the same time, usually at the same facility, there's someone else who will do a sound mix pass, and they'll do any smoothing. They'll usually add the narration at some point around there. But that's the process that most of these shows have to go through.
Jesus. Yeah. I mean, you have so many intricate little things to do. It's and it seems that, like I was saying in the beginning, like post comes on so early now. Fuck, man, you need all that time.
Yeah, we do. But then again, just like I think that any producer would acknowledge this, is that our schedules are getting tighter, quite a bit tighter.
Do you think that in our new little world of COVID, that you will? I would assume they'll have some editors work from home now. At least
all of us have to.
Yeah. At least in this, until we get it going and maybe get a vaccine, whatever. But do you think that will make you work longer hours? Don't you think you'll work more?
Yeah. We are all going through. We are all going through an adjustment disorder. Anyone would know. Anyone with any kind of certification in some sort of psychiatric medicine would know that most of the Western world is going through an adjustment disorder. So it is true that literally anything in this pandemic seems like it takes 3 times as long. But I did finish a show that is airing in July. It's the reboot of History's Greatest Mysteries, and we have Lawrence Fishburne hosting it, and unfortunately we couldn't. I don't think we shoot any host reps on, so he's just narrating it now. But in future episodes, I'm sure he'll be hosting. At least that's what Deadline said. But we had to finish an episode, a 2-hour episode of History's Greatest Mysteries, and we had to finish it remotely. Over a number of weeks and months, and I was blessed to have work. There's a lot of people who don't have work, and we had to figure out a way to do this remotely. And there's a number of programs that people use to safely be able to access these cuts and footage, because it is quite true, of course, that it causes a bit of an issue. And what do I mean by this? This is a standpoint of security,
right? Because nothing's tangible.
Yeah, you're talking about having to remote in on a show. That's hard, and it's everyone's kind of zooming, everyone's texting each other. It's like, I got to look for this, got to look for this, got to look for this. It's automatically adding some more time. And that's, yes, of course, emotionally, especially in April when we were still adjusting through this pandemic, then we're all a little bit better now. It's because now it's the end of May. But if we back in April, we were all still kind of sobbing once a day and stuff, and
right.
Myself included. So it wasn't ideal, but we got the show done, and that was great. So there's programs that people use, especially using a VPN, which of course means a virtual private network, that can securely hook up. Let's call it creating an emulation or an instance of a machine that's located very far away, and it can hook up to the server. And there's a few programs that do that. One of them is actually from Hewlett-Packard, from HP. It's called RGS, and where you hook into a secure connection, and it feels like you're just connected to a machine, but no, you're on your computer is just connected to this one that's 30 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And it's and that actually provided that latency is not an issue, which is of course the time between a user has performed an action and for the computer to respond. As long as the latency is below a certain amount, then I won't shoot my monitor. So, because that's actually very frustrating. That's something that, latency is a very important thing. And we'll talk about that when we talk about, some of my new career paths as well. But, it is kind of, it's something that it's all important. It's in order to be able to efficiently and successfully create a TV show remotely. We are having to figure this out on the go, but damn it, this is America, we figured out how to go to the moon. We can put a TV show together remotely.
I think we're all going to be very surprised, actually, how much we don't need to interact as much. I mean, definitely on some things it's inevitable and you have to, but as I've said, with working with buyers, or I'm sure working with other people in your department, you can be on the phone, you can FaceTime, you can, and if you're sharing screens and stuff, even. Yeah. I mean,
but there's also certain things that are not ideal.
By any means, it's not ideal.
So let's talk about kind of a part of what my job is, and it's similar to your job, your profession, is that the best. A lot of people would say that the best production designer is someone where it's not that you don't notice the design, it's that you just notice it enough, and that that the set is really, really cool and it stands out, but it's not distracting.
Right.
Yeah. Now, so my job is very similar, where I have to work with the pacing. I have to work with, figuring out, when to cut to the next shot. I have to work on when to bring in the soundbite, when to, especially act out is what we call it, where, it's the end of the act and it's a big cliffhanger sometimes, where Dorinda's about to throw a drink at someone's face. So all of these, all of these things are important, but when we're trying to craft this together remotely, there's something that I've noticed that's happening that's not ideal, and that is that talking to someone on the phone and or even Zooming with someone, or someone's just kind of watching my cut, there's a weird sort of stress, and it's because I can't really put my place it exactly, but I believe it has to do with having the presence of another human in an edit bay and us just figuring this whole thing out together. Just like I have to look at, just like you have to look at certain very small imperfections within, it's like, that flower vase is very pretty, and that I have to really face the plant this way, and all these little things.
It's like picking out furniture online.
Yeah, I'm looking at small. And I'm looking at small subtleties in someone's face. I'm looking at all these things, but on a screen. But at the same time, I have to read a room full of people. Sometimes I have to get a read on how a producer is taking, this is taking a cut, and that sort of thing can simply not be done in a world of remote working, of telepresence, and things like that.
Now that's an excellent point. Reaction, like genuine reaction to things, we are missing.
Yeah, and it's something where that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. I'm not like I'm some kind of a hippie or something like that, but it's this weird sort of human touch that is not present in remote work. And I think that's, first of all, something that can definitely contribute a bit to stress, but it's also, it's something that I think that's possibly why it does seem to take a bit longer to really get the damn thing done, is because, I have my own best judgment. This thing that's, I would say, just like with your profession, it's instinctual at this point. The avid media composer is literally an extension of my body. There's keyboards that people can buy that, of course, have all the commands on them, and I almost ask myself why my keyboard is completely blank. And I mean, it's like, Jesus, you're talking about a software that I've worked with for since 1998, 22 years.
Right.
For crying out loud, does your hand not know what C does at this point? So no, it's I'm having to really work fast and efficiently on this thing. It has to be so instinctual, and that's why reality editors, we don't have a lot of time to put together a hell of a show, and we have to get very good and very fast. And by that, that's why some of the best good and fast editors are also pretty expensive. It's one of those things where the old adage goes, what's like fast, cheap, and good. Pick any two.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I mean, I'm not saying that with any kind of boasting. It's a fact.
Well,
that
no,
if
you
you've
are.
been around here for a couple of decades and people still hire you, then it's probably not for your good looks.
But going off of that, you know what the you know what the keyboard does. You don't have to look. You get hired. You have a reputation for being a good editor, yet you took another path recently to go into VR.
Yes, I did. Yeah. So how can I kind of surgically explain this? And the other thing I'll say is, strangely enough, a lot of editors I know, not a lot, but I could name probably 5 or 10 of them who have gone into VR as well. And, we've still not necessarily figured out the strange question of why. Yes, starting roughly 2015, I would say 2017 is when I went hard into VR. And by this, I mean interactive virtual reality. And because there's a couple of different kinds. There's 360 video and stereoscopic 360 video, and that's not very interactive. And it's kind of the virtual reality of some of the earlier attempts at virtual reality. In 2014, there were a group of Google engineers who I believe were in France, and Google lets you dedicate air quotes 20% of your week, so one whole day a week, which is probably not likely. It's probably more like a few hours a week, because if you're working Google, you're very busy. I've been there up in Mountain View. It seems like fun, but they're cranking. So you are given one day a week to work on a personal project, and these 2 Google engineers decided, hey, VR is really stupid expensive, but let's see if we could find a cheap, cool way to do this. And they engineered this foldable little cardboard thing, and then
let me ask you something. It's whatever they're working on personally, does Google own?
No.
Okay.
No, it could. I mean, you can pitch it to them and they can buy it, but no, they have been working on their own project. In this case, Google bought it, but they. At least I think that's how it works. Gosh, I actually don't quite know the answer to that question, but I believe you do have some stake in it, at least. So these 2 engineers, they debuted this thing at like a huge Google event in 2014, and they said, and they're like, here's this cool thing. We're a couple engineers from France. We decided to make this thing. We're presenting it here in Mountain View, and by the way, literally everyone in the room, there's one under your seat. Throw your damn phone in there. So, and they're like, it costs like 3 cents to make these things. Like we could send it to developing nations if we wanted to. It was pretty cool. So that was one cool, cheap, big way for VR to kind of hit the masses. It kind of like everyone got one. And then there was some upgraded ones that was like Gear VR, for example, which was the first thing that was shipped by the company it's owned by Facebook now, that we know as Oculus. Now let's talk about Oculus in kind of that same time span. There was a man, a very young man, who actually was a teenager. I think he was 15 or 16, named Palmer Luckey, and he's this goofy, nerdy guy from Orange County, and his parents had the means to buy him like literally every random VR headset in existence, including these crappy cardboard things. But sorry, that was a little bit before that. So this is 2013, I think, roughly, when he was literally destroying these headsets and then finding the best parts of them. I'm kind of glossing over a lot of things, but in large part, this is what happened: is that he ripped everything apart. He figured out how everything worked, and he said, I'm going to take positional tracking from this one, that the displays on that one are really good, but these lenses are really cool, and that's really cool, and the sound system on that's really neat, but this is just a little bit faster on that, and I think if I work with an NVIDIA processor on a computer and have this 12-foot cable, I can do this, and if I use this sort of IR system, then the sensors are going to find me, and I'm not going to throw up. So it's like he had to figure out how to make a VR headset, and he like literally went to a hotel room, I think in Vegas, and strapped, literally duct taped a couple of them together. And then at CES in 2014, January 2014, I think, then he debuted it. And so many people were so blown away, including a man named John Carmack, who actually worked at id Software, and he actually created this video game Doom. He left his job and became the CTO of the company, and then Facebook bought him the next year for $2 billion. So they believed in this. It was a long-term investment. They believed in this product very early on. So I got bit hard by the bug 2015, 16, 17, 18, and then finally 2018 I went back to school, which is humble to do because I was 39 at the time. So I went back to school to learn as kind of a full-time student at a place that was called Upload VR. I went to a brick and mortar school to figure out how to create these interactive digital experiences. And it reminded me a lot of, this is something I had to do. I had to remind myself to kind of psych myself up every day to do something that was really hard. It reminded me of navigating this sort of unknown world that we were figuring out as we go, the world of unscripted, because in 2003 when I got into unscripted, it was still relatively new. Survivor had only been out for a few years. You know, we were still trying to figure out the rules for this. Now I was in this new world that's not so new now, but you know, VR has only been around. Some people would disagree with me, but VR has not even been around a decade. You know, we don't know, you know, where it's going to settle in the next decade, but you know, we're learning more every day with a lot of people playing nice with software and hardware and game engines and all this other stuff. Now,
you're getting in early.
Yeah, getting in early, and that's fun. It's hard, but you know, you own all of the reward when you're putting that much risk into a new industry and a new profession. Now, how is this similar to editing? It's very technical. To create, especially an interactive VR experience. I'm not going to really speak too much about 360 video and stereoscopic stuff, because the lack of interaction I have a real problem with. There's a couple of game engines out there that are constantly competing. That are one of them is called Unity 3D, and another one is called the Unreal Game Engine.
Because what you're really getting into is creating these virtual worlds.
Yes.
You went to school to create.
Basically.
Yeah, you're creating it in software.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. But but you know, even though this is going to sound kind of like coy, but you know, I'm still creating in Avid Media Composer. I'm still creating something out of almost nothing. It's a giant sea of usually very pretty footage, but I have to figure out and navigate the story using a complex software.
You're editing it. You're editing
I'm
virtual
editing the
reality.
software.
Yeah.
But I'm also not doing, you know, something that I will admit that is just very, very different. Is this is not only creating, you know, a 3D world using 3D modeling tools and 3D lights, which is something you could do in things like After Effects, for example, which is more and more editors have to know the Adobe system in After Effects. So you have to know a little bit about lighting and 3D and textures and stuff like that. But in this case, it's these game engines are these very robust pieces that are powered by, you know, a very big core of software, so that you can very robustly run. You can create this 3D environment, and the air quotes camera that is in these game engines, in this case, that is your VR headsets. Mm-hmm. So the camera is being controlled by someone's head, and we have to figure out, using a number of tricks, we have to figure out where each of these, you know, how to give someone a good experience that, first of all, is not going to make them throw up. Which is, you know, something that what we call the vestibular system, which is your inner ear, and we have to learn about the physiology of a human being. You know, how are we making sure that someone's head is being tracked successfully? How high does that frame rate have to be? Which, you know, in television you're looking at only about 30 frames a second, and in film it's about 24 frames a second. How high does that frame rate have to be before someone's starting to get sick? It turns out you have to be, you know, north of 72. It's ideal if it's north of 90 frames a second, 100 frames a second. So that's extremely fast. Okay, well, if the frame rate's set high, well, the resolution has to drop down. Well, how do I combat the lower resolution? Well, I can change this and this. How does sound work? So it's all these questions that we have to ask of how to convince someone more and more that they're in a virtual environment that they can interact with. Oh my God, how does interaction work? Can someone walk around? How does someone walk around without killing themselves in their literal home?
Yeah.
How do hands work? How do you track someone's hands? There's lots of ways we do that. There's companies out there now that actually that have these things you strap on, and it just tracks your fingers. How does feedback work? How do you tell a human being that that when their hand is touching a certain item or picking up an item, how do you convince someone that they touched that up? Well, that's, you have to use haptic feedback, and it has to go at a certain time that is corresponding to a sound that you're hearing and to an image that you're seeing, and that's the limbic system, which is a part of the central nervous system. So you have to understand so much about the human body and be a software developer and be a storyteller and understand how visuals work.
It seems like you went into something harder than you were already doing.
Well, it's not worth it. unless it's hard.
I mean, I looked at, clips on your website, and I mean, it's crazy of the things that you've just developed a whole world out of nothing. Like it's
but it's not really out of nothing. Just like with you, it's this is coming from hopefully a team of people that can get together and get along and figure things out. But a lot of times, if it's a smaller team, like especially in the VR world, then I'm having to figure this stuff out on my own. You're having to figure these things out on your own. I have to figure out exactly what is the lighting like? What is this room like?
Yeah, I mean, what is the architecture? If you want it right, and even the architecture of like, how does the door work? Was it swing left or right? Or I'm sure those are things that you're figuring out as you're going along and basing these stories.
And that's something that to get something off the ground. I would say it does not take very long, but the thing that does take a long time in the video game world in general, and the digital entertainment world in general, and interactive entertainment in general, and but especially the VR world is optimization. It's like I can get something limping maybe in a few days. The core concept of something, for example, or if it's a game, like I could get a primary game mechanic. I could try that out, and do little test levels of this. And what happens when I just take a stupid rudimentary cube and I just put this together and move this over here? And how does time work? Can I manipulate time? Ooh, I can. How do you do that? So it's figuring out all these things in a kind of a prototype, and then you're going into production and figuring out how to make it really slick. And unlike television and movies, this is storytelling in a lot of different ways, but you're giving the user the complete agency over the story. So you might have a really cool, heavily, beautifully decorated, scary haunted house, but only the user can perform the action to actually advance that story.
Right.
It's like if a door is in front of someone and they open up the little door and it goes hee, and you just it's like, is there a monster on the other side? Well, someone has to figure that out.
It's like what is that game that Ethan and I love from like the late 80s, Monster Mansion? Or
yes, yeah. Well, wait, what was that?
Something Mansion.
Maniac Mansion.
It's not. It's like an updated version of that.
Yeah, no, of course, and then those whole things like Leisure Suit Larry, and the guy who actually created Leisure Suit Larry is my neighbor. He lives very close to me. His name's Will Binder.
What?
But it's this interesting thing to see what VR has become and what it will become. In future iterations of hardware.
But look at how much it could possibly be needed right now. It's actors.
It's a possibility nothing, Kim. Q1, the quarter one Facebook from earnings were posted, and they were like, here's how much we made off of everyone's data who has a Facebook account and Instagram and all this other stuff. Here's how much we made, and then they're like, here's the non-Facebook income for Q1, and which means Oculus. So Oculus in Q1 of this year made $279 million.
Jesus.
Yeah, and they sold over 100 million in. I hope I'm saying this right. I believe it was over 100 million in content sales in the month of April, which is of course during the pandemic.
Why can't I get in something early?
Well, this is still very early. I mean, this is a time where a lot of people, just for their own psychological health, are getting into VR, and they're realizing, especially because of the Oculus Quest, which was released last year, they cannot keep those things in stock.
I mean, I lost money on Bitcoin. I'm still out. I'm still out Bitcoin money.
I know. Well, that's. Every industry, so a lot of these industries are sort of related.
I'm late to the podcast game.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, it's something that a research firm that's called Accenture, which is based in Ireland, that these are these companies that are all related, even though they sound like they're completely different. They are all related, and they're called something called dark companies. They love acronyms in the tech industry. So Accenture, was saying a dark company was one that would it's DARQ, and it's one that would satisfy any of these factors. And the first one, these are kind of a stretch for some of these these acronyms, but the D is distributed ledger, which is a very fancy term for Bitcoin, for crypto, basically. The second one is the A is artificial intelligence. The R is virtual reality, and the Q is quantum computing. So these are the companies that you want to really watch out for are the ones that are kind of at least touching on where there's at least tendrils, or they have a complete digital arm that's in any of these industries. And it's because the way that technology is moving. Okay, I'll give you an example. So a lot of people know with The Mandalorian that they used a virtual production that was using a company called Lux, which is based in downtown LA.
Right. I watched the making of that on Disney. I watched that little thing because I knew we were gonna get into that.
Oh, definitely. We should definitely show notes this because if anyone has not seen this, it's amazing. So it's this process where there's a projection screen that kind of covers. I mean, you could make it any size, I suppose, but it covers basically most of a set in the same way that a green screen would work. And green screen technology has been around 70 years. I would wager at this point. But it was this is something that's very new, where instead of a green screen, you are getting, in some cases, if you need to, final pixel, which is you are getting the shot using these projection screens that are projecting a virtual environment in the background. And when people actually see these sets, it looks distorted. It's actually a little nauseating to see it. And people are like, why does that look so funny if it's supposed to be this, it's supposed to be this set that we built? It looks weird. It's what my eyes are distorted. I'm getting ill. Why is this happening? Well, it's because that set is actually being photographed by a camera that, is before all these actors and a little bit of set dressing and stuff. Yeah. But it's not, it doesn't look right to you because the camera is actually being tracked by one of those aforementioned game engines like Unity 3D or like Unreal Game Engine from Epic Games. And these engines actually have right off the bat, you could start a new project and it says, hey, you make it a 2D game, you make it a 3D game, are you making a VR game? Hey, are you making a virtual production? Oh. And you just click right there and it'll instantly set up all these things so you can track where the camera is going. It's where you have cables that are sending it to this game engine, and the environment is basically dynamic. You can change all the lighting in the environment. You can change anything instantly. This is something that has sped up production by, I would say, an order of magnitude at least, because and it's also helpful for actors who normally are, humans are not very good at even a well-trained actor is not good at acting in front of a green screen. Right. Using this virtual production, which I was just speaking about to some friends that down in Texas who were like, how can we do this? I was talking to them the other day about it. And it's something that, especially in this pandemic, if you can only have very limited, let's say limited crews are coming back, in the fall or something. This is a way that on many shows that you could figure out a way to create a massive virtual set using these 3D engines. And people are like, "Oh, but that sounds so sci-fi." No. Do you want to know what used a virtual set? So let me if you just guess a movie from last year, like a major one. Just name me a movie.
Rocketman.
Absolutely use virtual sets in some cases.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, because there's a lot of weird slow-mo. So even that was using it. But you want to know one that's going to blow your mind.
Okay.
Parasite.
Oh, they did the whole skyline or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, they did. Yeah. Now, so that was using a virtual production on, they just had some big machines that were, located outside of they were basically located, under like an easy up tent, and you had these people who were having to figure out on the fly, how do we change the sky to do that? How do we do this? How do we do this? How can we, look at this real time and see if the shot's going to effing work? Well, they even had people on set editing the movie as it was being shot. And so it was really an astonishing moment of technology. And again, speaking to what we were talking about how our professions have to be very good, the way that show, the way that movie worked with the virtual productions, because we didn't know for months until BTS came out, behind the scenes came out about it. We didn't know that these were virtual shots.
You mean Mandalorian?
No, I mean like anything, but especially in Parasite.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think one of the funny things about the behind the scenes of Mandalorian is Jon Favreau kind of taking credit for,
He sort of did. Okay, I give him a lot.
I love him. I love him too, and I think it's incredible, the movies that he, like, the movies you would never think the guy from Swingers is doing, like Lion King live action thing, and I mean,
and it's not live action. That's what everyone calls Lion King live action. But it's completely
Jungle Book was live action.
Oh, sorry, say that again.
Do you think? But I would say Jungle Book was live action.
Yeah, I think Jungle Book in large part was a mixture of live production and CGI. But in the case of Lion King, not one of those objects.
Right. That's all. It was all life, digital. It's not. There's nothing was live.
Sorry. Say that again.
Nothing in it was live. It was all digital animals and
exactly. This is just the very point that we were trying to make, is that it's a bit of magic that occurs where in virtual production, where it has to be so good that you don't know it exists. So and by that, it's not just Jon Favreau. It's people like Irfan Merchant, I believe, was also working on Lion King with his production studio in Burbank. And he actually, I think that he's been so busy, he's actually had to move a couple of times in the last couple of years to move into bigger and bigger studios. And so it's these people who are downright heroic, because they're having to figure out, for these major studios like Disney, it's no pressure. It's just the Lion King, and it has to work.
I think too, one of the things that blew me away watching that was that it's not just one big giant like screen or like a green screen. It's just kind of like a piece of fabric type thing that's chroma keyed or whatever. This was like hundreds of like 60-inch TVs all put together.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
And especially in the sense of, well, okay, a lot of this was figured out. We have to actually give the credit to the production team that was working with Blade Runner 2017. And at SIGGRAPH of 2017, when that movie came out, then it was kind of breaking the internet. Where and his name escapes me, unfortunately, but it was one of the VFX supervisors was discussing how they used game engine technology. In this case, it was in the case of Mandalorian, it's the Unreal Engine. In the case of Unity 3D, it was these filmmakers, especially with Digital Monarch. Digital Monarch Media was owned by Unity, and they've been working on a lot of these projects as well. So it's these people who are just figuring it out every single day, how to create this thing, create these virtual environments that don't exist, putting on a VR headset and then wearing it on their headsets, on their foreheads like it's a little tiara, changing something in a computer, popping the HMD down, looking in a virtual set. It's like going to another friggin' dimension. It's insane. Popping the headset up again, changing something out, changing out set dressing, moving Simba around. It's like then putting it back on again. It's weird. It's like looking into another dimension.
Yeah.
And then having to go back and just make the movie that way. So it's having to use all these different technologies, and that's why I thought it was probably a good insight to look into this virtual reality stuff like 3 years ago, because it has paid off. It has really helped my career, and I do think that if editors have to be big technical storytellers, then it makes perfect sense that we have to go into the latest and greatest digital entertainment, and especially in this case, interactive storytelling. That's why I think it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely evolved. You're evolving with technology.
Yeah. Yeah, what if, March of 2011, what if I just kind of said, well, fuck it, it's, well, I guess all the videotapes gone, I don't know,
right.
I guess I'll just go home, and I'm not going to do my job because those factories are all fine. We have to figure things out, and that's why I think that being an editor is a very unique thing, because just like
Jonathan is just a plethora of knowledge. I'm sure you could tell he could talk about anything, and that is such a skill. I think in being an editor and now in creating VR worlds is just perfect, because he likes the details and finds interest in them. Just really interesting dude. I don't know if he knows a lot of people. You probably know him. I don't know. You could check out his work on his website, jonathanfischer.mystrikingly.com. I'll also have that link in the episode post. So I'm very thankful that he was able to explain editing to me and talk about how it relates to production design, the continuity of shows, and see that? We are all spokes in the wheel. Hey, I wanted to thank you for the ratings and reviews that people are leaving. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It really helps me out with this podcast. So, thank you. And if you haven't, just, right now, just clickety-click, 5 stars, cool. I also see that people are checking out the clips that I've been making on YouTube and the Decorating Pages podcast website. So I hope you're enjoying them. I think they're fun. It gives a little visual to what we're saying here. If you ever have any questions or requests of interviews, please let me know. You can always email me at kimwanup@decoratingpagespodcast.com. You can DM me on the social, Decorating Pages on Instagram or Twitter or the Facebook page, I would love to hear from you, though. I hope you got an earful. I'm Kim Wanup for Decorating Pages. Summer is half over. Are you floating in style in your Stogie? Stogie Floaty Luxury Pool Float. Available now on Amazon, Etsy, and StogieFloaty.com.